Okay, well, just want to welcome everybody to our second community conversation hosted by Franklin County Family and Children First Council. So great to see a lot of familiar faces and some new names and also some names that we know. So thank you everyone for joining, being part of this again. We are hosting these conversations and sharing these community messages with the intent and the purpose of supporting our community, Franklin County, Central Ohio, and to provide brain-based and trauma-informed resources really for all of you who are continuing to do the difficult work of working with children and families during this difficult time. And I just want to start off and more than anything, just say how much we appreciate all of you. It is really incredible and overwhelming and humbling to see how many different agencies and how many different people are continuing to be committed to the work that we're doing. We're finding new and creative and incredible ways to work together. So thank you to all of you who are continuing to do that work on behalf of the children and families in our community. And we're hopeful that the messages, the information that we share are useful to you all, but more than anything, we hope that this space, that this time, that we can share some common struggles and also some common successes. So please, this is a community conversation. We certainly will have a few resources and ideas that we're going to share with you all, but take advantage of the chat box area. A few of you are already kind of saying hey and checking in. Feel free to raise your hand either kind of through your video camera or to say you'd like to share something, and we will be sure to unmute and get you involved in the conversation here. Before I jump into some of our content, I just want to make sure I want to introduce a few folks from our team. So I'll give them a heads up here. Of course, we want to introduce our fearless and I say sometimes fearsome leader, Jane Wide. So we are always glad to have you part of the conversation, Jane. Glad you're here. And with me today as well, Eve Fitch, who is our Deputy Director of our REACT team, our opioid first responders support team. And also Debbie Holycross, who is another one of our Deputy Directors working with me as well in the Building Better Lives initiative. So we've got a good group of folks here. They'll be kind of chiming in back and forth in some of the conversation today. And we're so appreciative that all of you are part of this. Our topic today is focused on really how we can continue to have meaningful and positive and really kind of effective relationships even while we're doing social distancing. So we shared out this community resource a few days ago about staying close while social distancing, and we are going to put that up in the chat box if you haven't seen this document already. We also have a version of it that can be shared with parents, but it's really focusing on how exactly do we do this whole relationship piece when we are so far apart. So this document is kind of what I'm going to base some of the conversation about today. So hopefully you've seen that and it can be useful for you. And I'm just going to translate it more over to some slides that will make it a little bit easier for us to talk through some things. So I think one of the, first and foremost things I just kind of wanted to point out that, we certainly are all familiar with and know is just how important and powerful relationships are. It's been kind of incredible during this time that I think more than anything, we are realizing how powerful relationships are, just how essential the social connection is to weaving together that fabric of society. And we're seeing that in all sorts of new and challenging and interesting ways. And so that's why this conversation is so important. How do we continue to maintain the relationships that are important to us? How do we form and forge new relationships so that even while we are apart, we don't lose that social fabric and that connection? all of this circles back to resilience. And we talk about resilience all the time because we have found in our research and in the work that we do that yes, there is adversity. Yes, there is trauma. Yes, there are difficult things happening. But really, the conversation is about the protective factors. What happens after the adversity? What happens in the midst of the adversity? And so, what are the protective factors that are countering those risk factors that provides that buffering and creates a resilience and creates a strength in individuals that are going through those challenges and in that society? A question that I will be honest that I am exploring and thinking about a lot, I would love if we would go in this direction this morning, is what are some of the surprising resilience and surprising strengths that are being developed in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis? The challenges for educators, for healthcare workers, for child protective specialists, for all of us are great and are huge. But I believe that we are also seeing some really creative, amazing resilience coming forth. And if we can shine a light on those things, continue to amplify and focus on what those resilience factors are, I think that's going to give us hope and also prepare us for the future as we start to come out of this crisis. So all of this talk on resilience is really focusing on what's the value of these relationships moving forward. So, the stress that we're experiencing, this is not news to you. It is novel, meaning it's new. It's totally, we're in a totally unprecedented situation. Even the comparisons back to the pandemics from a century ago, we're in a totally new situation in this global pandemic that we're experiencing. It's unpredictable and it's uncertain. And that is the perfect recipe for stress for our brain. When something is new, when it's unpredictable and it's uncertain what's going to happen, that just makes our brain put all of the alert signals on. And the thing that we also know about our brains is that when we're feeling that stress, we instinctively reach out to connect with other people. When you drive by someone who maybe was just an offender bender in a car accident, you see them on their phone and they're calling their loved one and they're reaching out saying, "You're not going to believe what just happened to me." When we have a difficult day or we're really feeling down, we instinctively reach out to connect with other people. Stress pushes us to connect, and that's really what makes humans a strong species and a strong group, is that we connect and support one another. Which is also why this is so challenging, is that what we want to do, which is to run over to our family member's house, to go over to our parents and just reach out and get that hug, that is the thing that we can't do because we are practicing physical distancing. So stress is kind of pushing us to this place where we want to connect with others, but we also have this immediate pushback as well, which is really kind of one of the unique challenges in this situation that we're going through. So we just really want to focus and emphasize right off the bat that we're not talking about social distancing. We're talking about physical distancing, but increasing those social connections. So we talk about staying physically distant and safe, but emotionally and socially connected. Absolutely, we need to practice that physical distancing. We need to practice flattening the curve and protecting everyone who's working to fight this pandemic. But we have got to find new and creative and frequent ways to be socially and emotionally connected, because that's really what our brains need. That's really what we need, is to be socially connected. If we lose that relational connection, then we are really going to be feeling the stress and the challenges. And so the power of those relationships can't be overstated moving forward. So let me just pause for a second. I was kind of talking for a while there, always inviting Eve. I'm sure she has some thoughts to kind of share, to jump in on any of that, or if anyone has any comments or thoughts that they want to share in the chat box or with the group as well.
I know it'll be surprising, but for right now, I don't have any comments.
I am shocked.
I'm sure you are.
Listen, group, I'm going to need your help today, because if Eve doesn't have any comments, they're going to be stuck with me for an hour. So
I'm sure I'll come up with some.
Okay. Well, again, it's kind of like, yeah, we know relationships are important, but it's just kind of that reminder. And I've been reflecting on this idea that we don't really know the value of something until we lose it. And we're seeing that in so many situations, that what we maybe took for granted in connecting with our coworkers, in students seeing teachers, even just, the connection of a handshake or that physical touch with another human being, where the absence of it reminds us of just how meaningful that is. So we want to try to think about ways that we can creatively, intentionally, and really purposefully boost those relationships, boost that emotional connection. So that's kind of what the whole focus of what we're going to talk about today is. And I'll just put it out there that I would love to hear from any of you all about what some of those unique, creative, really effective things are that you're seeing. I think some of the challenges people are running across are, how do we celebrate birthdays for our young kids who, a birthday is really important to them and they can't have a birthday party? How are we collectively going through grief processes, going through celebrations, those things that are important to us to do as a group? And I'd love to hear from folks as we continue in the conversation about what are some of the creative ways that you're doing that you're boosting those social connections. So, as we kind of jump into that, I think a really important tidbit around the brain science, and as I have been spending time focusing and listening to Dr. Perry's teachings about this, he has said this repeatedly, recognizing that just a little bit goes a long way. And he really emphasizes the idea of dosing, of recognizing the dose or the amount of the interaction and how much that interaction has that positive effect on a person. So, we think about in terms of, you think about, if you're really struggling and you see a therapist, and so you go and you talk with your therapist for 1 hour a week, and you have a long extended session one time over the course of a whole week. And Dr. Perry will say again and again, that's really not the most effective way to get the positive impact of that social interaction. What our brains really want is a high frequency, a lot of short interactions interspersed and periodically throughout the day. And so when we think about relational interactions, we might think, oh, I can't have that big birthday party with my child, or I can't have that family gathering around the holidays that we're used to having. I can't have that one big chunk of time where we all get together. And we do miss that. That is a loss. But it can be just as impactful, or maybe even more, to have short bursts of interactions throughout the day. So even just 5 minutes of a phone call, or even getting that text message that's kind of a surprise that says, hey, I'm thinking about you today. Hope your day is going well. Sharing, a cute picture of your kid doing something fun at home, that can provide that connection in our brain that actually provides that regulation for an extended period of time, as it's kind of spaced out throughout the day. So the impact of those relationships is really, really strong, even in a short spurt. Just kind of pause for a second to give folks if anyone has a comment or feedback on that, if they're seeing that happening or in any way. I also think one component with this is recognizing that the opposite is true. And I don't want to dwell on this because I want this to be a positive conversation, but recognizing that when we are, exposed to or interacting with negative conversations, that can really have a big impact on us as well. So being intentional about limiting how some of that goes, limiting the sort of doom and gloom news cycle, or being really intentional about positive conversations with people is important moving forward with that. So what are some of the ways that we connect with folks? I'll share a couple, and then again, I want to kind of hear from folks from the community. So I'm going to pause after each one of these. So I'm giving you a heads up here. I want to hear how you are doing it. And the first way that I just want to throw out there is that we are making frequent connections. Again, it's about that dosing, about that spacing. So not just one time in the day, but really frequently increasing the number of what those relational interactions look like, and really fighting that urge to isolate. It can be easy to kind of just get in our heads, get in on our screens, and only do, so-called social media. It's even interesting to think about, what we call that social media, when it's not really personal connection at all. Sometimes it's not live, sometimes it's not person to person, it's with strangers. We need to kind of fight that urge to isolate and dive down that social media hole, and instead increase the number of real, meaningful relational interactions we're having. So I'll just throw out one example that we're doing in our workplace, and love to hear from other folks. What are you doing to increase those relationships? We have assigned work buddies. So we've said, you know what, this week, this is going to be your friend. We have friendship assignments, and that might seem kind of weird to say, this is your buddy for the week, and I'm going to assign who that is. Normally, we let those relationships develop naturally, but that's because we have the benefit of the lunchroom at work, or we have the interactions in the office, but we are actually assigning, these are the two people who we want you to reach out and connect with each other a couple of times this week, check in, make a phone call, share a couple text messages, and increase those interactions. This might be somebody who you've never spoken with before, but increase those interactions so you have more connections with one another. So that's one thing our agency is doing. I'd love to hear from others. How are you increasing those relational interactions? What are some ideas that you are coming up with, in some creative ways that you are boosting those connections with other people?
Just a few we have in the chat box so far are Ridgewood Elementary. They're doing car parades for students. We've seen lots of schools doing that, even daily. Michelle says their teams are doing that daily. Zoom birthday parties. Young women's group meeting every Thursday via virtual, doing things like Jeopardy and scavenger hunts, putting on calendars for intentional breaks to connect with friends and family, all kinds of things.
Very cool. I haven't participated. Yeah, go ahead, Eve.
Of course, I'd have something to say eventually.
Great. I was waiting for you. Thank you.
So, I think the nice part is that I've found that I've connected with some family that I wouldn't have typically connected with through Zoom. So I've done some Zoom birthday parties with, a family member in Kentucky, and then did a Zoom virtual dinner last night for my nephew's birthdays. And I saw then, my nephew from Seattle participated in that. And I normally would celebrate that birthday with those boys, but he'd never be a part of that. So it was, I think if we think about the positives that this is presenting to us, it's that we get to see family that we might not normally get to see. I know that we've done some happy hours, but with that, I saw some cousins that were I think they're in Alabama now. Is that true, Lenny? I see you shaking your head. They're in Alabama. So, you get to see people that I only get to see maybe once every other year. So that's been really awesome.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Eve. Thanks for that. That's kind of one of those unique, surprising areas that we're sort of realizing, hey, this is how we build that resilience. Maybe our community is even bigger than what we had previously thought. And if we can kind of expand that, that's really neat. So,
hey, Jesse.
Yeah.
I'm Sonny Whitehead, a counselor at Norton Middle School.
Hey, Sonny, thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely. We had a student, a former student, who's moved on to the high school, but was undergoing a really serious operation through this. And we did a parade by his house, just a car parade. And it ended up probably, maybe 50 cars. Everyone stayed in their car, so it was completely safe. But he was standing in the yard so we could wave and yell out the window. And some of the cars painted, things on their car, just wishing him well, and we involved the police and the fire department, and it was something that was very meaningful to him and to his family, but it also helped us as a staff, pull together in a way that we might not have done before.
Right on. That's a great story. And you really are highlighting we've talked about this before, I know, around this idea of kind of serve and return and that interaction that we get back. We might think that reaching out to connect with somebody else is for them, but it boosts our, stress response as well. It boosts our resilience. And so there's that kind of joint interaction of that benefit, both for the person that we're doing that car parade or that we're doing that Zoom meeting for, but also the benefit for us as well.
You could feel just the sense of energy from where we assembled in the cars before we went by his house.
That's
even
awesome.
though people were being very respectful of the social distancing, there was a lot of energy in the air, and talking from car window to car window and that type of thing.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
I have another version of that. I live in a golf cart community, and there are probably 8 or 10 families with small kids, and so they're all having birthdays and not able to have all these kids come over to their house. So we all arrive on their birthday in our separate golf carts. You're not allowed to get out of the golf cart, except that the kids, instead of giving birthday cards because they can't touch them and then give them to somebody, they all make signs that say happy birthday or whatever they want, and then they're on stakes, which we pound in the front yard of that child's house. So then for the next week or however long, that child can get up and say, oh yeah, I had a birthday party, and it kind of lasts as a reminder that they have friends out there that they can reconnect with eventually. So they say things like happy birthday, can't wait to play, or I'll see you soon, or we'll get together, or whatever the kids want to say. But it's just a reminder that this isn't forever, that it will end and they will get back together and enjoy each other's company.
Awesome.
So Jesse, my favorite was that my dad set up some music equipment and taught people in my sister's neighborhood. They all stood in the street, and he taught them a line dance, and they danced in the street. That's probably my favorite connection.
I have an idea to share for with elderly people. My mom's turning 90, and we can't, have a big thing, but we have relatives all recording a short 10 to 15 second video on their phone. They're forwarding them to me, and I'm organizing it. But for people who don't have access to that level of technology, they could just send almost everybody has some data on their phone these days. Yeah,
those short clips that we can record and share. That's awesome. Thanks, Nancy.
We're doing something like that too, Nancy. My grandparents, can't do a Zoom meeting. They have no idea what that is or how that works, but we've put all the grandkids and aunts and uncles on an email thread that they can just reply to. And so they're sharing their story. They're sharing how they met. They're sharing about their dates. They're sharing their family history just in this email thread as they think of things throughout the day. And it, takes them a long time to type anything. So it's taken up a large portion of time for them too. So they're still getting to stay connected to family in that way.
Very cool.
We had a couple of questions, Jesse, before we move on. Karen's asking for any ideas on supporting high school seniors who are missing so much, like proms, award ceremonies, etc. So I wanted to throw that back out to our community. I know a couple of people have responded in the chat, but just ideas for high school seniors and supporting them.
Yeah, I think that is so tough. I really, my heart just breaks for the people who can't celebrate and kind of have that experience that, that they kind of anticipated and were knowing that they were going to have. I've heard about folks who have had to change wedding plans drastically, or graduation ceremonies. And that is just a really, really tough thing. So, I think just, from me, and I'll certainly open it up to people who are going through this on their own. My children are younger and we don't have that. But we did have to have the conversation with them yesterday to say schools are closed for the rest of the year. And that was a loss for them. So I think, first just recognizing there's a loss, and that's going to be having some grief and having a sense of, man, this really is tough. And recognizing that is going to be hard. Giving them space for that grief is really important initially. I think the other thought that I would have, and then I'd be curious to hear from folks who are going through this personally, this is certainly going to be a year to remember, and they will always be able to say, they were the class that COVID and coronavirus impacted them. And I'm sure at some point something will happen that they'll find a way to celebrate it. We maybe don't know what that is yet. It'll be really different, and it'll certainly be memorable, and I can't wait to see what that's going to be like. But not everyone can claim that they were the class of COVID-19. So we'll see how that turns out. But any folks who are going through that with your family, somebody who's had to go through the loss of graduation or a major celebration that they weren't able to do. It's not an easy one. Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
I have a different perspective on the loss situations. I had a coworker who told me that his son, who is a senior here in Central Ohio, is actually pretty excited that he doesn't have to deal with that cap and gown crap, and he doesn't have. So I think it's important to know the student and to realize when it's an impact on the student versus as a parent or a school staff person. I look forward to those community celebrations. Just as we've seen on social media, the people who define themselves as very private, perhaps introverted, they're loving this physical distancing. There may be students that think, oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about a date for the prom. And for them and their brains, that's very comforting. It's one less social stressor. So just another perspective on the loss, right? It's how each individual perceives the event that they may be experiencing.
It's a really good reminder, Angela, that each person's going to have a different response to the situation. And there may be some things that some students or individuals were really looking forward to, and they are really upset that's, it might be something that I never would have even thought about. So each person is going to have a different experience with that for sure. Thank you for that. Anyone else, how are you kind of walking through that with your kids? And I think Angela's point is really well made, that we might feel that loss even more as the parent or the person who cares for them. And so that's kind of a walking through for us too. I don't get to, take those senior pictures or celebrate that end of year. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that my son, actually, we had a discussion about it yesterday. He hasn't said much about it because he's a senior, and but he told me yesterday he really doesn't care about all of that, even the ceremony, because I was really excited because we get to pick up his cap and gown. I think it's May 6th. So I got really excited and told him, and he's like, you mean we have to do that? The whole thing? I thought we were getting out of it. And I was like, oh. So it really is sometimes more about the parent. And, just being able to see them in the cap and gown and, planning the graduation party. We're still not sure what's going on with all of that. So I appreciate that last comment, because I am trying to keep it in perspective and not showing how it's affecting me, because it really is about him and that class. And but it's definitely something that we're dealing with right now. I personally am. But I'm trying to just kind of play off of him and kind of be chill about it as well. So, yeah, very different.
I think that's a great perspective that Christine is sharing. I know at first my daughter was really sad about it, and now I think it's maybe more about me. And what I'm thinking about is, how will they feel down the road when they haven't had these sort of milestones of closure? That maybe at 18 years old, you don't even really know that those things can have an impact for later in your life.
So one thought would be, I think family graduation parties are so big and such a, it's a huge celebration for everyone. But a thought might be to reach out to the folks that would typically be invited to that graduation party and ask them to write a memory to that student. In many ways, that's far more personal than what the interaction at that party would be. And so it might be just a nice way for them to have a memory of that graduation, and in many ways much more personal, because you go to those big graduation parties and you never really have a chance to interact. This would give them an opportunity to really hear from friends and families, kind of their thoughts and how proud they are. And so anyway, it's just a food for thought.
And it seems as if whether it's a high school graduation, an 8th grade transition, or even a preschool transition or kindergarten to elementary kind of a thing, it really is an opportunity for that personal reflection, scrapbook pages, the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, and can I mail you the book and you write a message to our loved one, things like that. I love the comments in the chat box that people are sharing, very specific, this is how we've done it and adapted. And in terms of the event, the experience, and the effect language of our trauma work, it truly is us providing some input on what the long and short-term effect of this big event will be for all of us of any age.
It's really a testament to the power and the creativity of, the human spirit and the human brain, that we are going to be creative and find a way to adapt and figure out what's going to happen. And it sounds like what a lot of folks are saying is keeping that balance of emphasizing and recognizing and holding the value of that transition, and still recognizing, hey, this is important, and you're, this is a thing that's happening, and recognizing that, and then creating the space for how do you creatively want to commemorate that? How do you want to remember it? Is that writing? Is that some sort of a virtual connection? But holding those two things together and finding those creative expressions of that. It's pretty awesome. Loving this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Let me just throw out a couple more ideas, and these are really kind of things that we are talking about already in a lot of ways, which is great. Just other, kind of important parts about connection. We've really been saying this about making those connections personal, connecting with people in the same room. Again, this is sort of one of those opportunities and those reminders of we can be in the same room but still be distant from each other. So when I am reading with my children, do I have the discipline to turn my phone off or to leave it in the other room? We sit down for dinner together. Are we going to turn off the screens and just be present with one another and have that connection with the people who, we are going through this experience together in the same house? If I'm not with somebody in the same room, if I stay at home on my own, using those personal connections of making a phone call, of having that video chat, there's so much that our brain interprets and gathers through tone of voice, through hearing the pacing and the fluctuation of the conversation. And when we have those, brief, quick opportunities, whether it's a car parade or walking in the neighborhood or doing those kind of necessary interactions at the store, making eye contact and smiling with somebody, just taking that minute to, kind of look at them. You know, honestly, I hadn't thought about sharing this, but it's a recent struggle that I'm feeling, is that because we are wearing masks now out in public, people can't see me smiling at them. I try to smile at folks a lot, and I can feel myself grinning behind my mask, and they just kind of walk right by me, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if they're smiling or not. So maybe the wave is going to become more popular. You know, we're going to be adapting and coming up with creative ways of doing that. So, you know, if you're outside, if you're on the sidewalk and you can smile and see that, there's a real value in that smile and how that connects with somebody. And I don't know if folks are finding other creative ways to get around the mask challenge that covers that up. So maybe I need a mask that has a smile on it, so I just always look like I'm smiling. We'll see, that might be the thing. So making those connections personal, coming up with ways that it really, I love what Sonny shared about how he said they could feel the energy when they were gathering together. That's that power of those relationships. There really is built within our neurobiology and built within our physiology a response that creates an energy and a power as we connect together. So somebody must have put a good idea in the chat because everybody's laughing. I don't think I said
Actually,
something like
Joanne thinks that'd be creepy for you to have a smile on your mask.
We all said that people have different, you know, it's got to be individualized. Everyone has a different perspective. So this is how I want to show my positivity out in public. So,
you know, I think the other thing is that it's an opportunity to get to know folks in your neighborhood. I live in a condominium complex, and I think sometimes people are pretty separate. They all know my dog's name, but they don't know my name. But lately I've noticed there's been a lot more opportunity for conversation with my neighbors. They'll stop and talk with me and not just talk to Willie. So that's been kind of nice, and I think it's an opportunity to touch base and check in on folks in your neighborhood. And I don't always think about that. And I have quite a few older folks that live in this neighborhood as well. So, you know, I've taken time to make sure and check in on folks. And I noticed some folks saying they purposefully, intentionally try to connect with, you know, at least 4 or 5 other people throughout the day. So here's a great opportunity.
yeah.
Get to know some neighbors.
Thanks, Eve.
You know, Jesse, the other thing that I have found is that if you can't smile, conversation does the same thing, and people can hear that smile in your voice. And one of the things that surprised me is, and it's logical because we all say a lot about the medical workers who are risking their lives. But when I'm at the grocery and I say to the person who's in the aisle stacking cans, thank you so much for coming to work. And oh my gosh, it means so much to me that you're still working and so we can all get groceries. They're like astounded that somebody actually recognizes them because they're not, you know, medical providers, but they're in a stressful situation too. And it's just been fun to be able to express my gratitude to people who don't normally hear it.
Right on. Yeah. Again, that's that kind of where are we going to find some surprising areas that we're going to build a new appreciation for things. That's great. I love that.
I was going to say, I have a freshman, and it's really interesting to see her and her friends come up with things. So she would have been in volleyball conditioning right now, and so they're doing that on Zoom, going outside and doing their conditioning. And then some days her friends will come around and they'll have like a dance party in the street. And then she's still trying to stay connected with, like, she does theater. So they've been doing like challenges, like, okay, here's a song, we're gonna put it together or make a music video. So it's really cool to see them. And then they even had like a teen board meeting for their theater. They're like, the kids did it. They're like, hey, we need to still be on top of everything. Let's meet on Zoom and talk about, you know, the coming year. So it's really neat to see the kids kind of take charge of getting together and being like thinking outside the box. So it's just really cool to see. And then just for the high school, the senior stuff, like around here where I live, like last night we all put lights on and candles and stuff out at 8 o'clock for the senior class, and people have just been posting like pictures of their seniors. But I agree with the comments being made. Like I could see it being affected to like a parent. Like I would love to see my daughter graduate. So I don't know how that would feel, but I feel like some of the kids, like the comments are like, he don't really care. But it's just so cool to see everyone coming up with a bunch of things. Like my family, we did like online games like Quiplash with my family who lives across town. And my parents, like, they don't really do anything like that, but I still wanted to connect with them, and we just had a blast. It was so fun. And we do that at church with my youth group we have. So, I mean, technology has just been super helpful with everything going on.
Yeah.
Hey, Jesse,
that's awesome. Yeah.
I noticed a question from Tara about caseload and connecting with family, and I really appreciate the comment because I personally know that sometimes, you know, we're connecting through so many different means, and I sometimes don't want to do that one text. I don't want to have to do one more email. I don't want to have to do one more telephone call because everything seems to take longer than normal. So one suggestion, Tara, might be that it's not just I'm calling to check in, but I'm calling because I found this great resource. I just wanted you to know about it. Opening up for conversation. The other thing that I think can be helpful is, hey, I'm just calling because I wanted you to know how much I appreciate you as a parent. I know how hard this time is, and you're doing an awesome job. I mean, those might be ways to interact with somebody without just saying, hey, I'm just calling to check in on you to see how things are going. Because that does get a little old after a while. So I think we have to think creatively about how we can do that communication, but make it positive. Not one more telephone call that I didn't need for the day.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, honest question about, you know, how are we connecting with folks on our caseload beyond sort of the just calling to see. And I think that, you know, one connection point with that, in addition to here's a resource to share, you know, Julie shared about, hey, I saw something that reminded me of you, so kind of making it personal. I think one other component of that is making it planned, making it scheduled. And that's for you and for them. It can be tough to sort of conjure up that mental and emotional energy to do another call. But if Tuesdays are the day that I call these 4 or 5 individuals on my caseload, and I know that, and they know that, they can be expecting that call and know that this is when we check in, this is when we touch base. And the purposeful component of that can be more than just a how are you doing, but hey, last time we talked about you know, coming up with playing some games with your kids. How are those games going? What kind of games are you doing? You know, last time we talked about doing a little more physical activity with your pet. How's that going? You know, weather's been a little bit challenging. It's okay if you didn't happen, but knowing what is that question that I'm going to follow up with you on, to just kind of have that conversation and not as a, you know, you're in trouble if this didn't go the way we wanted it to, but it helps our brains to kind of have something to hang it on to and know that that's there, so that we can follow up with that. So making those calls kind of planned and purposeful.
So Jesse, for everyone at the Franklin County Board of Disability, we're blessed with an internal team of mental health professionals, psychology assistants, and they are balancing both check-ins that are spontaneous, as well as if you always got together with me on Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd like to call you at 2 o'clock. Again, it may only be 5 to 10 minutes instead of 45 minutes, but it is planned and purposeful. and it allows that continuation, continuity of care. Last week we introduced a new concept. How did you practice it this week? Or someone in the chat box here had the same idea of something that would be personal, a meme, a funny thing. We're trying to infuse much more humor and a variety of media that would lend itself to that positive experience from what the media would tell you is, oh my Lord, we're all going to die tomorrow, and it's going to be awful. Well, it is hard, but how do you ever learn in life if something's not hard? So our therapists are trying hard to find that balance between the check-ins and the formal, structured 5 to 10 minute therapeutic interactions.
Yeah, that's great, Angela. Thanks. And I think the benefit from that too, again, talking about the kind of two-way interaction of all this, the two-way street. If I'm feeling a constant internal burden on myself of, I just need to be checking in, I can feel like I'm never doing enough. But if I have that list of my 4 or 5 clients that I'm checking in with today, hey, I've done my phone calls, I've done my things, and now, I can set that aside and I don't need to beat myself up about it. There is a time for kind of, again, having that structure of I've done my caseload calls, and now I can move into connecting with the people in my personal life I'm going to connect with. It's a really good question, a really good challenge to recognize. There's sort of a flip side of this when we have the opportunity to connect with anyone around the world, that can be a burden of, there's an endless list of people I need to connect with. So again, that planned and purposeful structure to it really makes a big difference. We say this phrase all of the time in our work around having small tolerable doses. So what's achievable for today, and doing that.
Jesse?
Yeah.
Someone on the chat mentioned earlier, do you think that existing in this environment is a learned skill? And I just found that to be a really interesting comment, and have been thinking about it off and on through the rest of the conversation, in that as an extrovert, I feel pretty comfortable in having learned how to communicate with people, but this required a whole new learning series of practice and figuring out what has really worked, what has helped me, and what hasn't. And it's a new skill that I really didn't have a very good handle on before.
Right.
But I just wondered about your comments, or the other folks on the line, in terms of how do you feel about, is this really learning a new skill?
So I 100% agree with that, and think it is a really valuable point of self-reflection. I'll just kind of share some broader concepts that we talk about in training a lot, that when an individual is in a given situation, they develop skills that are adaptive and work for that person in that situation. The things that kept me alive and safe and functional at home in a high stress, domestic violence, high threat environment, now I am moved from that environment at home into a school environment. Well, now my hypervigilance, my on edge, my put up my fist real quickly, those skills that were adaptive there are maladaptive in this new environment. And so I have to learn new skills to apply and adjust to that new setting. And very similarly, all of the skills that we had learned and that were working for us in a pre-COVID-19 scenario now are taken away and are flipped, and those skills are not working in the same way. So we have to develop new skills. Recognizing that for ourselves, identifying what those new skills are, practicing them, small tolerable doses, introducing that and learning and practicing is a really helpful way to think about that for ourselves. And I hope we'll build some empathy for us, for clients and families that we're working with, when we're saying, you know, well, why can't you just sit still in class for 45 minutes? Well, I've never had to sit in one place for that long ever in my life. So this is something new for me. And that it can build that empathy for us in recognizing for families and kids that are working in that way, for sure.
And I think the other thing is just stopping at the end of the day and saying, wow, that was a good day, and figuring out why was it a good day, or, oh my gosh, I struggled today, and why did I struggle, and what can I do differently tomorrow? How can I practice different skills to make tomorrow a better day?
Mm-hmm. It's that process of identifying what that skill is, practicing it, recognizing that it might not go well the first time, and developing it over time with repetition, and predictability, getting better at it. So I just want to, I saw the question,
Jessica,
Debbie.
were you going to say something really quick? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to add one thing. To kind of mention what Jane did, I just had a very similar conversation with my mom the other day. And she asked how I was doing. And the way that I explained it to her was, when we aren't going through COVID-19, a lot of the times I make the choice after 4:30 p.m. to go home and just relax and be alone. And so what I had said to her was, you know, Mom, there's a major difference between when you make the choice to be alone compared to when you're almost forced to be alone. Because I'm single, like I live in my house by myself. I have my kids half of the time. So for me, this hasn't really been a major adjustment, because this is the normal lifestyle that I guess I choose to live most of the time. But there have been some days that are harder than others. But I always tell myself, like I tell the families and the kids that I work with, my friends and my family, is that's when you have to make the choice to ground yourself and know what works for you. So if a phone call with your best friend is it, then do that. Or my thing is doing yard work. Like, I never thought in a million years I would say that one of my passions is like gardening, but it has become one of my biggest go-to things right now, especially with this virus thing going on.
Thanks. There was a comment that I want to make sure we give some space and address from Lisa from Hamilton Elementary. And Lisa, we would certainly invite you if you want to talk and share a little bit more, give some more context to this. But she asked about, how do we reach families who are homeless? Some of my students are struggling during this time and feeling very concerned about them. Do you want to share any more context or information about that, Lisa? Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So a lot of my families, I talk with them weekly to discuss, you know, how they're feeling, you know, what's going on. And a lot of my families were homeless prior to the COVID-19. So those families are high on my priority list. And I talked with a family yesterday, and she's struggling. Her mom and her stepdad are in the nursing home where COVID-19 has spread it, on top of homeless, on top of her son, my student, is not able to get on to any of his assignments because of this. And so it really touches my heart to see a lot of my family struggling in this way, not being able to physically contact them or to meet up with them, to give them a hug, or to provide different resources for them. And the school district, you know, Columbus City Schools, doing a lot. You know, we're doing a lot to service our students. But our families are struggling.
Yeah.
A couple of my families, they've lost loved ones to COVID-19, so they're trying to survive. Yeah. And a lot of times we hear, and I'm all for the the positive. We want to hear the good news all the time. But while we're listening to the good news, we need to reach back and try to help those families who are struggling through this fight. And the mom, she was like, Miss Johnson, she said, I have to call you back. She had a lot going on at the time, and I felt so bad yesterday. And I thought about her all day, all night, and I'm going to try to reach out to her again today. And they're struggling. They're trying to stay above water.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I go and try to encourage her, she's at a state now, she don't want to be encouraged. She wants help, you know, and my student's not the only child. She has like 4 children, and she's single, you know, she's going through with her mother and her stepdad. So I just wanted to.
No, I really appreciate you bringing that to the group. And there's not, of course, any easy answers for that. You know, otherwise we would have solved that and done that as quickly as we could if it was easy. And I think one of the so, you know, a couple sides of it. I mean, a big challenge is for all of us that are in the helping profession and went into teaching and social work and counseling and working with individuals with developmental disabilities, is because we have a desire to help. And now there is this barrier that prevents us from doing that. And it creates in us a real internal conflict that just hurts, and we can't get over that. And so no matter how much I want to help, even the thing that I used to be able to do, which is when you were in my classroom and when we were together, at least I could give you a hug and hold you for a second and say, hey, I care about you. And now even that has been taken away from me. So what can I offer when we're so far apart on the phone? And that is a real hurt that many of us in the helping profession are going through. So I guess I just want to give space and recognize that that's very true in there. And so, you know, we are all, as we continue to say, we're in this together. We're continuing to give voice and bring highlight to the, put a spotlight on the struggles and the challenges that are happening. And so this community and these resources are here. You know, we're sort of coming a little bit to the end of our time, but, you know, feel free, Mrs. Johnson, to, you know, if you want to put your contact information there in the chat box, and anyone who has recommendations, particularly for folks going through homelessness or those struggles, can reach out to you. And we've got to be doing this work on an individual basis to help one another more and more moving forward, because the challenges are definitely real. We're going to find ways to overcome. We're going to find ways to be creative and address those, but we need to continue to be connecting and supporting one another. And a key part of that is highlighting the stories and giving voice to those people who are being overlooked and who don't have what they need. So on that note, especially I want to be respectful of time in the last couple of minutes we have here. I'm just going to put up a question on the screen, and some folks are starting to put some resources and things in the chat box there. Somebody asked about, are we going to share the community messages again? We can put those out in the chat box, and we'll have a follow-up email to this conversation today that will link to the recording, and we can copy those messages as well. We're going to continue to be sharing those out with folks, but we really want to be supportive and responsive to the community and to the needs that folks in the community have. So I would just sort of put out briefly here what topics, what questions, what challenges would be helpful in your setting for us to address. And that might be like what Mrs. Johnson offered there around helping students who are dealing with homelessness, or helping families that are in really, really difficult situations. What would some of those topics and questions be that we can be looking into, that we can be doing some of that work to then come back and provide written resources and provide the space for us to have that conversation here together to do that. So please just take a second and put that in the chat box, and we will go back over and review those things and try to prepare for that moving forward. And then just to close out, our general information email is right there, information@helpmykid.org. That goes to our outstanding administrative assistant, and she will direct that to the person in our agency that can be most helpful for you. And if you want to reach out to me directly, my email is there as well. Debbie, is there anything kind of loose ends in the chat there that we would need to address or tie up at all, or?
Well, as I put in there, if you weren't on the SurveyMonkey for registration for today and we don't have your email from our past community conversation, please be sure to include that over there as well, so I can be sure to include you in our follow-up email. Uploading all of those community messages that we've shared thus far, both the service provider version and the parent version, so you guys have that as a resource as well. And then as Jesse said, any kind of outline topics and things that we can kind of be planful for would all be great. So.
And you know, these are, like any conversation, this is both kind of a continuation of the relationships we already have with many of you, and maybe the start of something new going forward. We know that this COVID-19 situation is not going to end. It's not going to all be wrapped up quickly. You know, we've heard folks say repeatedly, we're not just going to flip a switch and life will go back to normal, whatever that was. The impact will be ongoing. So we appreciate folks from schools that we've connected with, you know, Mr. Whitehead from Norton, Mrs. Johnson from Hamilton, folks that we've been in your schools, in your classrooms, and this is an ongoing relationship that we're going to have moving forward. So please continue to stay in touch, and as we continue to go through this together, our mission, our intent is to support and empower you all who are doing the work to provide the space for there to be both sharing successes and the positive things, and to provide the space to say, this is hard, this is challenging. I think what I love about my work, though, is that I work with people who see a challenge and they run towards it. They move towards the challenge because they know people are in need, and they know that we're only going to get through this if we do this hard work together. So I am so grateful for all of you and the hard work that we are continuing to do together. And I know that we're going to keep doing that throughout this entire situation as we move forward. So thank you everyone for your time today. We will stay on and leave the chat box open for anyone who needs to. And please stay tuned. We'll continue to share more resources and have more of these community conversations as we move forward. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jesse.
My pleasure. Thank you all.